Hold on, before you dive into this story. Have you ever wondered what you would do if the person you loved most doubted you at your most vulnerable moment? If this story moves you, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. And at the end, leave me your opinion in the comments. Do you think forgiveness is always possible? The world froze the day he abandoned her in the delivery room, convinced the baby wasn't his. 2 years later, he saw a child who was his living image. Julian Miller stood frozen in the hospital room doorway, unable to take another step. The soft cries of a newborn echoed faintly from within, but all he could hear were the voices of his parents in his head, whispering doubt and certainty with equal weight. His father had told him days ago that Sarah had been seeing someone else behind his back, that the baby she now held couldn't possibly be his. His mother had added just enough emotional pressure to tilt him further, reminding him of his career, the empire he was building, and how one wrong decision could unravel it all. At first, Julian hadn't wanted to believe it, but fear has a way of blinding even the most intelligent man. When Sarah turned her head and saw him standing there, her face lit up. She was tired and pale, but so full of love and hope that it almost broke him. She called to him with her eyes, a silent plea for support, for his presence, for him to believe. But he didn't move. Instead, he took a step back, and then another, until he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with their newborn. When the elevator doors closed in front of him, Julian felt a weight lift from him, but it wasn't relief. It was numbness. That kind of numbness that creeps in when you've just made a decision you know you can never take back. Sarah didn't cry when he left. She didn't scream or run after him. She just looked at the baby in her arms, whose tiny features already showed hints of the man she loved, and now hated. Her heart didn't just break. It unraveled slowly, like a loose thread, until all that was left was exhaustion and disbelief. She whispered soft words to the infant, promising him that she would protect him, that he was wanted, even if his father refused to see it. In the days that followed, Julian immersed himself in work. He signed deals, gave press conferences, and smiled for photo ops. The tabloids praised his focus, his clarity, his unwavering ambition. No one knew what he had left behind to maintain that image. No one asked, and he never offered an explanation. When people mentioned Sarah, he dismissed her with an empty stare, pretending she had been nothing more than a fleeting mistake. Meanwhile, Sarah moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of vibrant Portland, Oregon. She juggled sleepless nights and endless diapers, freelance work and overdue bills. She became quiet, introspective, and strong in ways she never imagined she'd need to be. Every time she looked into her son's eyes, blue like his father's, she felt a storm of conflicting emotions. She loved him more than life itself. But forgive Julian? That was something she couldn't even imagine. Her body healed, but her spirit didn't. She never told Julian about the long nights in the emergency room, about the first fever or the first laugh. She never sent him photos or texts. If he wanted to be gone, he could stay gone. But deep down, somewhere beneath the anger and the fatigue, a small part of her hoped. Not that he would return, but that he would realize what he had given up. She didn't need him to fix what he had broken. She just wanted him to see the truth, and the truth she knew was growing stronger every day in the arms of a little boy who looked more like his father with every passing hour. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? Would you have sought out Julian or let him go completely? Comment with your opinion. 2 years passed, marked not by calendar pages, but by sleepless nights, scraped knees, and small victories. Sarah's life had been restructured around her son, Leo, who had grown from a fragile newborn into a vibrant, curious toddler, with a shock of blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that mirrored the very man she had spent so long trying to forget. She woke up before the sun every day, often to the sound of tiny feet pattering into her room. And every night, she collapsed into bed after juggling work, parenting, and the heavy silence that settled once Leo was asleep. Money was always tight. The part-time paralegal job she had taken after her maternity leave was barely enough to keep them afloat. She supplemented her income with freelance legal research projects she completed late at night, long after Leo was in bed. Her friends had slowly faded away, some unsure what to say, others too absorbed in their own lives to notice hers had completely changed. Her parents helped when they could, but they lived in another state and had their own struggles to manage. Sarah didn't talk about Julian, not with her friends, not with her family, and certainly not with Leo, who was still too young to ask where his father was or why he never visited. But she thought about him more than she wanted to admit. Every time Leo smiled a certain way or said something with the same cadence Julian once used, she felt a silent ache in her chest. She no longer cried. That part of her had dried up in the first few months after Julian left. Now she just carried the loss with her, neatly folded into her days, like the small scar on her abdomen, a reminder that something had been taken from her. There were moments when bitterness threatened to swallow her whole, especially when she remembered how easily Julian had walked away, with no explanation, no goodbye. He had never even held Leo. He had made his decision based on lies, lies told by people who were supposed to protect him. And what hurt the most was that he hadn't questioned them, not once. He had believed her capable of betrayal. He had believed her son wasn't his, and he had walked away without looking back. But Sarah didn't let that bitterness show. She couldn't afford to. She had a little boy to raise, and Leo needed joy, not shadows. So she learned to smile again for him. She took him to the park every weekend, even when she was exhausted. She read him the same bedtime story 6 nights in a row because it made him laugh. She taught him how to say please and thank you, how to tie his shoes, how to be kind. Every milestone he reached, she celebrated it like Christmas morning. Still, there were hard days, days when Leo got sick and she had no one to lean on, days when she wondered if she would ever trust anyone again. Sometimes, late at night, when the world was silent and her defenses were down, she found herself imagining what might have happened if Julian had stayed, if he had held their son that day, if he had seen past the lies. But she always pushed those thoughts away. She had stopped believing in second chances. One gray afternoon, she took Leo to the city park in downtown Portland after work. He loved the swings, and she loved watching him fly, his little sneakers kicking at the sky. She sat on the bench with a thermos of lukewarm coffee and a book she had no intention of reading. Leo's laughter filled the air. Then, across the field, she saw him. Julian. He wasn't dressed like a businessman that day. No suit, no tie. Just dark jeans and a wool coat. He looked older, a little more tired, but unmistakably the same man she had once loved. Their eyes met, and in that split second, she saw something flash across his face. Shock, disbelief, maybe even recognition. He stared at Leo, who had just gotten off the swing and was now running toward her with a wide grin. Julian didn't move. He just stood there, frozen, as if his world had just been upended. Sarah turned away before Leo reached her, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it over the wind. She picked up her son and whispered, "Time to go, sweetie," trying to keep her voice steady. That night, as she put Leo to bed, she couldn't stop shaking. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know if Julian had truly seen what she feared, and hoped he had seen. But for the first time in 2 years, something had cracked in the wall she had built around herself. And it terrified her, because if he had seen Leo clearly, if he knew, then everything might change. And after having survived for so long alone, Sarah wasn't sure she was ready for that kind of earthquake. Do you think Sarah should have run away with Leo forever? Or is it important for him to know his father? Share your point of view in the comments. Julian couldn't sleep that night, not after what he had seen at the park. That child, the way he ran, the way he laughed, the exact shade of his blonde hair, the same piercing blue eyes that stared back at Julian every morning in the mirror. It had been a split second, but in that moment, something inside him shifted violently. He had always believed he had done the right thing, or at least the necessary one. His parents had been so sure. The timing didn't add up, they'd said. Sarah had been distant. She'd smiled at other men. The seed of doubt had been planted, and he had watered it with fear and self-preservation. But seeing that child, so unmistakably his, made all those excuses crumble like dry leaves. He spent hours pacing his apartment, ignoring calls and canceling meetings. His assistant was bewildered, unsure why the normally serene and sharp CEO had suddenly gone off the grid. Julian didn't offer an explanation, because he didn't have one. All he had was questions. What had he done? How had he allowed himself to believe such a lie? And most of all, what kind of man abandons his own child without even asking for the truth? By morning, the exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was soul deep. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at an untouched mug of coffee, thinking back to the day he walked out of that hospital room. The image came back clearly. Sarah holding their newborn, her eyes full of a silent hope, and him turning away without a single word. He hadn't even looked at the baby. The shame was sudden and blinding. He didn't deserve forgiveness, but he knew with absolute certainty that he needed to find them. He needed to see the child again. He needed to talk to Sarah, even if she slammed the door in his face. It took him 2 days to track her down. She had moved, changed dabs, cut off most mutual contacts. But Julian had resources, and with each new piece of information, his guilt only deepened. She had lived alone, raised their son without help, without even child support, because she had never asked for anything. She hadn't tried to punish him. She hadn't exposed him in the media. She had demanded nothing. She had simply disappeared and endured. When he found the address, he sat in his car for almost an hour, watching the building from a distance. He saw her come out with Leo, holding his small hand as they crossed the street. Leo was chattering excitedly, pointing at things only he could understand, and Sarah smiled at him with a tired tenderness that pierced Julian's heart. He didn't approach them that day. He couldn't. He wasn't ready, and they didn't deserve to be ambushed. But he started coming back. Every day for a week, he watched them from afar, not because he wanted to invade their privacy, but because he needed to see what they had become without him. Leo was full of life, curious, joyful, fearless, and Sarah was no longer the soft-spoken girl he remembered. Now she was fierce, focused, and radiant in a way that came not from ease, but from survival. Julian began to realize that by leaving her, he hadn't just missed out on his son's life. He had missed the opportunity to grow alongside a woman who had become something extraordinary. The next week, he finally gathered the courage to talk to her. He waited outside Leo's daycare, timing it carefully. When Sarah came out with Leo skipping at her side, he slowly got out of his car and walked toward them. Her eyes locked with his instantly, and her whole body tensed. She gently pulled Leo behind her, protectively, like a reflex, and Julian stopped several feet away, not wanting to cause any more damage than he already had. "Please don't go," he said, his voice dry with nerves. I need to talk." She looked at him, her eyes hard but unreadable. "There's nothing to talk about." "There is," he said softly. "I saw him. I know, and I didn't know." She exhaled sharply, looking at Leo, who was tugging on her coat, oblivious to the tension. "That's the problem, Julian. You didn't want to know." He swallowed, unable to deny it. "I was wrong. I was lied to. My parents." "I don't care what they told you," she interrupted him, her voice quiet but shaking. "You left. You didn't ask. You didn't even hold him." The silence that followed was heavy. Julian nodded slowly. "I know. I've lived with that every day since I saw him. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to come. I had to tell you to your face. I'm sorry, Sarah. I was weak. I was scared, and I believed the wrong people. But he looks so much like me. I saw it. I know he's mine." She looked away, her eyes glistening, and knelt beside Leo, picking a leaf from his coat. When she stood up again, she said nothing for a long time. Finally, she said, "I don't know what you want from us, but if you're going to be here, truly here, you can't disappear again." "I won't," he said quickly, too quickly. "You can't say that yet," she replied. "We'll see." And with that, she took Leo's hand and walked away, leaving Julian standing in the cold afternoon, humbled, but somehow lighter than he had felt in years. It wasn't hope yet, but it wasn't the end either. Comment now. Do you think Sarah should give Julian a second chance, or is the damage already done? What would you have done? The following days were fragile, suspended between uncertainty and a quiet possibility. Julian didn't push. He didn't call or show up unannounced. Instead, he waited, unsure if he was respecting her space or just too scared to risk rejection again. He returned to his routines, but nothing felt the same. The boardroom lost its thrill. The applause at shareholder meetings sounded hollow. The numbers on the screens meant little when he couldn't stop thinking about a little boy with his smile, and a woman who had once trusted him enough to carry his child alone. Sarah, meanwhile, couldn't stop replaying their encounter. She was angry, furious even. But beneath the anger was a strange tremor. Not of fear, but of something she didn't want to name yet. Julian had seemed lost, not rehearsed or manipulative. And most disorienting of all, Leo had liked him. He hadn't cried or hidden behind her. He had looked at Julian with an open, innocent curiosity, and that haunted her. She wasn't ready to forgive him. She wasn't sure if she ever would be. But she also couldn't deny the ache of seeing her son meet his father for the first time, not knowing what he had missed. The following weekend, Sarah sent a brief text. It wasn't sentimental. It was careful and clear. "If you still want to see him, meet us at the park at 11 on Saturday. Just you." Julian stared at the screen for a long time before replying with a simple, "I'll be there." That Saturday, he arrived early. He wore jeans and a gray sweater, trying not to look like a corporate machine. He hadn't known what to bring, so he had a small toy car Leo might like, and a book under his arm, something his mother used to read to him as a child. When Sarah arrived with Leo bundled in a bright yellow jacket, the boy immediately ran toward the playground. Julian didn't move, unsure if he should follow. Sarah stood next to him, her arms crossed, not looking at him directly. "Thanks for coming," he said carefully. She just nodded, her eyes still following Leo. "I don't know what this is yet. I just thought he should have the option of knowing you. That's all." "I don't want to confuse him," Julian said. "I just want to be around, even if it's just as a friend for now." "He doesn't need a friend. He needs a father. Someone who shows up and stays. I want to be that. For real. Then don't say it, she replied. Show it. Leo came running up into them just then, sand on his hands and a wide grin on his face. He looked up at Julian and pointed to the swings. Push me. It was such a simple request, but it landed like a stone in Julian's chest. He smiled softly and nodded. Yeah, buddy, let's go. They walked to the swings together. Julian gently helped Leo sit down and started pushing, not too hard, listening as the little boy shrieked with laughter. Sarah watched from the bench, her arms still crossed, unsure what to feel. A part of her wanted to cry. Another part wanted to get up and walk away. But mostly, she just sat there, because for the first time since Leo was born, she wasn't doing this alone. Over the next few weeks, these visits became a pattern. Julian came to the park every Saturday. He brought small things, snacks, toys, books. But more importantly, he brought his time. He learned how to talk to Leo, to match his pace, to answer his endless questions. He never rushed. He never made promises he couldn't keep. And slowly, Sarah began to let her guard down, a centimeter at a time. One afternoon, with Leo asleep in her lap in the sun, she looked at Julian and asked, "Why didn't you question it? Why was it so easy to believe them?" He didn't deflect. "Because I was scared. I was selfish, and I didn't want to lose everything I thought I had built. But I lost more than I ever imagined. I see that now." Sarah looked down at her son's face. "He's amazing, you know. You missed a lot." "I know," he said softly. "But if there's still time to learn who he is, even just a little, I'll take it." She didn't answer. She just kept holding her son. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to protect him alone. And that, even if she wouldn't say it yet, mattered more than anything else. The quiet of the 5th month of their new rhythm brought a fragile calm, like the first clear days after a storm. Julian was no longer a stranger in Leo's life. He wasn't called Daddy yet, and he never asked to be. But when Leo fell and scraped his knee one afternoon and instinctively looked to Julian before anyone else, Sarah felt something shift. She was sitting only feet away, present. And yet her son had chosen the man who once walked away before he ever held him. That moment moved her in a way she didn't want to look at too closely. Because if she did, she would have to acknowledge that Julian was becoming a real part of their world. And it scared her. Not because she didn't want it, but because she did. And wanting meant risking it all again. Julian felt the change too. He began to anticipate Leo's needs, noticing little things. When he got overwhelmed by noise, when he needed time to wake up before being spoken to, what stories made him laugh. He asked Sarah questions, not just to be involved, but to understand. He didn't try to overstep boundaries. He didn't challenge her authority. If anything, he respected it so deeply that it sometimes took her by surprise. And every time she braced herself for him to fail or disappear, he didn't. One day, after a long afternoon at the Children's Museum, Leo fell asleep in the back seat of Julian's car. They had all gone together. Sarah had insisted on driving separately at first, but Julian had offered to pick them up so Leo wouldn't have to be transferred from one vehicle to another. She had grudgingly agreed. After he parked outside her apartment, they sat in silence for a while, neither of them wanting to wake the boy. "Do you ever think," Julian said softly, not looking at her, "about how different everything could have been if I had stayed that night?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She traced a circle in the condensation on the window. "Sometimes, but mostly I try not to." "What good would it do? I think about it all the time," he admitted. "How I let fear make a decision that cost me everything." Sarah turned slightly in her seat. "You're here now, and he's lucky for that. But I can't go back and erase those years. I can't unlive what I lived. I'm not asking you to, Julian said. I'm not here for you to forget. I just want to be worthy of being a part of what comes next. Sarah sighed and looked back at her son. He's my everything. You hurt us both, even if he doesn't know it yet. I know, Julian said. I live with that every day. But I'll keep showing up, even when it's hard, even if I don't get everything I want. Because he deserves a father, and you deserve peace. That night, after she carried Leo inside and put him to bed, Sarah sat on her sofa and let herself cry for the first time in months. Not because she was broken, but because a part of her, just a sliver, was starting to hope again. And that kind of hope is the most terrifying of all. What does home mean to you? Is it a place, a person, or a feeling? Let us know in the comments. As the weeks went by, Julian began to help in more practical ways. He volunteered to drive Leo to his speech therapy sessions once a week. He stayed through parent-child playgroups. He even started cooking Sunday breakfast when he was invited in. It started with small things. Sarah asking him to grab milk from the store while she changed Leo, or him wordlessly passing her the wipes. But in time, those small things became habits, and the space he occupied in their lives slowly became less temporary. Leo noticed too. He no longer called Julian by his name. He called him Jules, a nickname born from a toddler's mispronunciation and worn with affection. Julian didn't correct him. He wore it like a badge. And then, one night, as Leo fell asleep on Julian's chest during a movie, Sarah looked over and realized her fear had been replaced by something else. She couldn't name it yet, but she no longer braced herself for him to disappear. She no longer wondered if he was playing a part. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. And real was more than she ever thought she would get. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't love. But it was close. It was the beginning of a life neither of them had planned. And they were both now brave enough to reach for it. The autumn settled gently over the city of Portland, blanketing the streets in warm gold and rust-colored leaves. The air turned crisp, and Leo started insisting on wearing his favorite beanie with bear ears, even in the house. It had been nearly an entire year since Julian had re-entered their lives, and the change in all three of them was undeniable. Julian was there almost every day, picking Leo up from daycare when Sarah had late meetings, reading bedtime stories, attending preschool open houses, and even helping to assemble a wobbly IKEA bookshelf that had been half-built in Sarah's hallway for nearly a year. He had become a fixture in their home, not as a guest, but as something more permanent. With the comfort of that routine came complexity. Sarah found herself questioning her own boundaries. Julian wasn't the same man who had left her in a hospital bed. He was softer now, more thoughtful. He asked before he did anything, and he listened when she spoke. He never interrupted. He never defended a version of the past that made him feel better. He owned his mistakes in a way that felt awkward and unpolished, and that made it even harder for Sarah to keep him at a distance. One Thursday evening, after a long day at work, Sarah came home to find Julian and Leo in the kitchen. They were making pancakes for dinner, batter everywhere, flour on the countertops, Leo's face smeared with maple syrup and pride. It was chaotic, but it was beautiful. Julian looked up, a little sheepish, and said, "We got hungry, and someone wanted to help." Sarah didn't scold them. She just laughed, a soft sound that surprised all three of them. That night, after Leo was in bed, she poured 2 mugs of tea and sat across from Julian at the kitchen table. They talked about nothing for a while, about her annoying coworker, about a strange ad Julian saw on the subway, about what Leo had learned in preschool that week. But as the conversation lulled, Julian's gaze turned serious. "Do you ever think about what this is?" he asked softly, not looking at her directly. She stirred her tea slowly. All the time. I just don't know how to define it yet. Me neither, he admitted. But I know it's not pretend. I know I care about him. And I care about you. That never really stopped, Sarah. She looked at him then, and her heart did what it used to do when they were younger. When love felt like an open road instead of a collapsed bridge. She wanted to believe him, but a part of her was still protecting the version of herself that had been left behind. I don't trust easily anymore, she said after a pause. And I can't promise you that I'll be able to give you what you're hoping for. I'm not asking you to promise anything, he said. Just keep letting me be here. Let me earn it if I can. And she nodded. Because that felt safe. Because it was honest. In the weeks that followed, their dynamic shifted in small but notable ways. Sarah started inviting him to stay for dinner without him asking. Julian brought Leo's favorite muffins on Monday mornings before work. One Friday, he fell asleep on the sofa while reading to Leo, and Sarah covered him with a blanket instead of waking him up. The moments were simple, but they added up. They began to share the weight of parenting in a way Sarah didn't realize she was missing. When Leo came down with a bad flu, Julian stayed with them all night, holding a bowl, wiping their son's forehead, running to the pharmacy in the pouring rain without complaint. He didn't just show up. He stayed, through the messy, the exhausting, the real. And Sarah, watching him curled up on the edge of her sofa at dawn, realized he wasn't doing it for guilt anymore. He was doing it because he loved their son, because he loved her. Still, she didn't say those words out loud. Not yet. But the wall between them had begun to crumble, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder what it would be like if they weren't just co-parents, if they were something more. She wasn't ready to name it, but she wasn't turning her back on it either. Not anymore. When winter came, snow blanketed the city of Portland in a soft silence. Their lives had settled into a quiet rhythm that almost felt like a family. Julian had stepped into his role with a naturalness that surprised even him. Leo began to expect him, not with hesitation, but with delight. Tiny arms reaching for hugs, proud declarations of "Julian, pick me up today," echoing down the preschool hallways. He still didn't call him Daddy, and Julian never asked him to. The name didn't matter. The connection did. For Sarah, the slow transformation was harder to process. She was used to doing things on her own. She had survived the sleepless nights, the scary illnesses, the empty holidays, all without anyone to lean on. And now, here he was. No longer a shadow of her past, but a real man who showed up in ways that were no longer just for show. He was part of the routine, and part of her. One evening, just before Christmas, they attended Leo's preschool holiday concert. It was the kind of chaotic event only parents and toddlers could love. Paper snowflakes were taped to the walls. Glitter was everywhere. Teachers were trying to keep 3-year-olds in a line as they sang off-key carols. Leo was proud in the front row, his reindeer antlers slightly askew, and Julian sat next to Sarah, filming the whole thing with a shaky hand and misty eyes. Sarah looked at him once, catching the raw emotion in his expression. That, more than any apology he had ever uttered, told her how much he had changed. After the concert, they bundled Leo up and walked to a nearby diner for hot chocolate. Leo chattered on about his songs, his classmates, how he was the loudest reindeer, and how Jules had to watch him sing again at home. Sarah smiled through it all, sipping her cocoa, occasionally brushing snow from Leo's eyelashes. It was simple, it was ordinary, and it scared her more than anything, because simplicity was the one thing she had never had with Julian before. Later that night, with Leo asleep in the back seat of the car, Julian didn't start the engine right away. They sat in silence, the windows slightly fogged by their breath. "I never thought I'd get to have this," he said, not looking at her. "This?" Sarah asked. Her voice quiet. He nodded. "Not just being a father, being with you, too. You let me in, even when I didn't deserve it." "You didn't," she said with honesty. "But you stayed long enough to earn your way back." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I was going to wait until Christmas, but I think maybe it's time." Sarah looked at him warily. "What is it?" "It's not what you think. It's not a ring or some dramatic gesture. I know we're not there yet. But I wanted to give you this." She unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a simple photo frame. Inside was a candid snapshot of Leo on Julian's shoulders at the park, laughing so hard his face was flushed. At the bottom, engraved in the silver, were the words, "The moment I knew I'd never leave again." Sarah looked at the photo for a long time, her throat tight. "You've changed," she whispered. "I had to," he said. "But more than that, I wanted to." They didn't kiss that night. There were no grand declarations, just a long, quiet drive back to her apartment. When they arrived, Julian carried Leo upstairs, put him to bed without waking him, and moved to leave. But at the door, Sarah stopped him. "Do you want to stay for dinner tomorrow?" she asked. "It's just spaghetti, but it's something," Julian smiled. His heart swelled in a way it hadn't felt in years. "I'd love that," and so it continued. Slowly, unrushed, unpressured, without guarantees. Just two people finding their way back to something that had been broken. Something that was still scarred, but was healing in a way neither of them had dared to hope for. For the first time, Sarah stopped bracing for the worst. She allowed herself to believe in what was growing between them. And Julian, humbled by everything he had once taken for granted, finally understood the depth of what it meant to be part of a family. Not just to love, but to stay. Spring arrived with subtle changes. The snow melted into soft puddles along the sidewalks. Leo's winter boots were replaced with sneakers, and Sarah found herself opening the windows again, just to let in the fresh air. It had been nearly an entire year since Julian had reappeared in their lives, and the change in all three of them was undeniable. Leo was thriving, confident, happy, and bright. He knew his two parents now, not just one, and he never questioned that both were his. He didn't understand the past, and Sarah hoped he never would. Not the loneliness, not the betrayal, not the cold silence that once sat between them. All he knew now was warmth. For Sarah, there were still moments of hesitation. Her wounds hadn't disappeared. They had just scarred over in silent, invisible ways. But Julian had continued to earn back every ounce of trust. He never missed a school event. He never forgot pickup time. He never crossed the invisible boundaries she had drawn at the beginning. In time, she stopped noticing those boundaries because he stopped needing reminders. He understood her rhythm, her silence, her looks, the weight behind a single stare. He knew when to lean in and when to give her space, and that, more than anything, had healed her. One afternoon, they sat on the front steps of Sarah's apartment, watching Leo blow bubbles across the lawn. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over everything. The light made Julian's hair look even blonder, and his eyes softer than she remembered them in years. Leo laughed and chased the bubbles with his whole body, arms outstretched as if trying to catch the entire sky. Sarah smiled, her shoulders relaxed. There had been so much tension between them once. Now, there was just this quiet contentment. Julian leaned back on his hands and looked at her intently. "You know, I used to think my whole life was about achievement, the next big deal, the next title, the next headline. But none of it ever felt like this." Sarah turned to him, her expression open. "Like what?" "Like home," he said simply. "Not a place, but people. You and Leo are my home." She didn't speak right away. That word, home, had meant something different to her. It wasn't soft carpets and warm meals. It was survival. It was long nights alone with a baby and no answers. But she understood what he meant, because lately she had started to feel the same way. The three of them, imperfect, connected, had built something strong. Not because it had been easy, but because it had been hard. And still they stayed. "I never thought I'd say this," she said, her voice low. "But I'm glad you came back." Julian looked down, his throat tight. "I didn't know if I'd ever deserve to hear that." "You don't," she said, with a smile that softened the words. "But you're here, and that's more than I ever thought I would get." Leo came running up just then, collapsing into Sarah's lap in a whirlwind of giggles and grass-stained knees. Julian reached over and smoothed his hair back. Leo leaned into the touch without hesitation. It was natural now, unquestionable. Sarah watched the moment, etching it into her memory. There had been so many nights she had cradled this child to sleep, wondering if he would ever know his father. And now here he was, tangled up between the two of them. Safe. Weeks later, on a warm April afternoon, Julian asked if they could go somewhere special. Just the three of them. He didn't say why. He just told them to get dressed comfortably. They drove out of the city, past open fields and winding roads, until they arrived at a quiet house with a wraparound porch. It wasn't ostentatious, it wasn't grand, but it was beautiful, with enough room for a little boy to run and enough quiet for Sarah to breathe. "This was my grandmother's house," Julian said, as they got out of the car. "She left it to me when she passed away, and I never did anything with it. I didn't know what it was for, until now." Leo ran through the tall grass like it was his own private kingdom. Sarah walked the perimeter slowly, taking it all in. The old swing set, the ivy climbing the porch, the steady breeze. Julian joined her after a moment. "I'm not asking for anything." His voice was careful, "but I wanted to show you this, because I want to build a life. Not just moments, not just weekends. I want the whole thing." Sarah looked back at the house, then at him. There was no fear in her this time, no suspicion, just the quiet certainty that came from time, consistency, and a love that had been tested and proven to be real. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, "but I'm not afraid of it anymore." He held out his hand. She let him take it. And in that small moment, under the open sky, with the sound of their son's laughter echoing from the trees, what had once been broken between them was whole again. Not perfect, not untouched, but whole. And that was enough to begin forever. Don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and leave us your opinion in the comments. Your support helps us continue to tell stories that touch the heart.